The millionaire CEO kissed his maid to escape an arranged marriage, but ended up falling in love. The champagne glass in Ethan Wakefield's hand had been full for the past 43 minutes, and he hadn't taken a single sip. The grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel in Manhattan buzzed with New York's elite. Oil executives, tech moguls, and real estate dynasties all gathered under crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's homes. Everyone was waiting for the same thing: the official announcement of his engagement to Emery Kensington, the blonde socialite who had been circling him like a vulture all evening. Ethan adjusted his Armani cufflinks for the 5th time. His jaw clenched as he watched his father, Charles Wakefield, shake hands with Emery's father near the marble staircase. They were discussing merger terms, not wedding plans, because that's all this was: a business transaction disguised as romance. "Mr. Wakefield," a photographer appeared beside him, camera ready. "Could we get a few shots with Miss Kensington? The Times wants to run the announcement tomorrow." Ethan's chest tightened. Tomorrow. The word felt like a death sentence. "Give me 5 minutes," he said, setting down his untouched champagne and walking toward the nearest exit, a service corridor that led to the hotel's staff quarters. He needed air. He needed space. He needed to think of a way out of this gilded cage his father had constructed around his life. The corridor was blessedly quiet, lit only by fluorescent strips that hummed softly overhead. Ethan loosened his black bow tie and ran a hand through his dark hair, trying to calm the panic rising in his chest. 36 years old, and he'd never made a single decision about his own life that mattered. That's when he heard footsteps. A young woman rounded the corner, carrying a silver tray of empty glasses. She wasn't dressed for the gala, no designer gown, no sparkling jewelry. Instead, she wore a simple black dress with a white apron, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. When she looked up and saw him, her green eyes widened in surprise. "Oh, Mr. Wakefield, I'm sorry. I didn't know anyone was—" She was his housekeeper, Chloe something. He'd barely noticed her since she'd started working at the mansion 2 weeks ago. But now, in the dim hallway light, something about her presence felt like a lifeline. "Don't apologize," he said, his voice rougher than intended. Behind them, he could hear the murmur of the crowd growing louder. Someone was calling his name, probably his father, ready to parade him in front of the cameras like a prized stallion. Chloe stepped aside to let him pass, but instead of walking by her, Ethan stopped. The panic in his chest was building, and he could hear photographers gathering in the main hallway, their voices echoing off the walls. "Mr. Wakefield, there you are," a reporter's voice called from somewhere behind them. Without thinking, without planning, without any rational thought at all, Ethan stepped closer to Chloe and cupped her face in his hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and then he kissed her. It was supposed to be quick, a moment of rebellion, a way to buy himself time. But the moment his lips touched hers, something shifted. She was warm and real and completely unpretentious. Everything his world wasn't. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, he forgot about the cameras, forgot about the engagement, forgot about everything except the way she felt in his arms. When they broke apart, Chloe stared at him with wide, confused eyes. Her cheeks flushed pink. "What? Why did you—" The flash of a camera exploded behind them. Ethan turned to see a photographer grinning triumphantly, his camera still raised. "Got it. This is going to be front-page news, Mr. Wakefield. Who's your mystery woman?" Chloe's face went pale. The silver tray slipped from her hands, glasses shattering against the marble floor in a cascade of broken crystal. And in that moment, as chaos erupted around them, Ethan realized he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or possibly the best decision he'd ever made. Chloe's hands were still shaking as she unlocked the door to her studio apartment in Queens at 2:47 a.m. The cramped space felt even smaller tonight. A fold-out couch that doubled as her bed, a kitchenette with a microwave that only worked half the time, and a stack of unpaid medical bills on her coffee table that seemed to mock her every time she walked through the door. But it was home, and more importantly, it was far away from Manhattan's glittering chaos. She kicked off the uncomfortable black flats the employment agency had required her to wear, and sank onto her couch, still wearing the uniform dress. Her phone buzzed insistently on the side table, but she ignored it. She'd been ignoring it for the past 4 hours. What had just happened? One moment she was collecting glasses from the service corridor, and the next she was being kissed by one of the most powerful men in New York, while cameras flashed around them like lightning. Her fingertips touched her lips unconsciously. She could still feel the warmth of his mouth, The desperation in the way he'd held her face. It hadn't felt calculated or cold, like she would have expected from someone like Ethan Wakefield. It had felt real, but that was impossible. Her phone buzzed again, then again, and again. With a sigh, Chloe finally picked it up. 37 missed calls, 49 text messages. Her voicemail was full. The first message was from her best friend Ivy, who worked nights at a diner in Brooklyn. "Girl, are you seeing the news right now? Call me." The second was from her supervisor at Pristine Cleaning Services. "Chloe, we need to talk. First thing Monday morning." The third made her stomach drop. It was from a number she didn't recognize. "This is TMZ. We'd like to offer you $50,000 for an exclusive interview about your relationship with Ethan Wakefield. Please call." Chloe deleted it without reading the rest. She opened her laptop, a second-hand Dell that took forever to load, and typed Ethan Wakefield into Google. The results made her feel sick. Billionaire CEO's secret romance. Who is Ethan Wakefield's mystery woman? Wakefield dumped socialite for unknown blonde. Every major news outlet had picked up the story. The photo was everywhere. Ethan's hands on her face, their lips barely touching, her eyes wide with shock. In the harsh camera flash, she looked terrified, which she realized was exactly how she'd felt. Chloe slammed the laptop shut and buried her face in her hands. Tomorrow was Sunday, which meant she was supposed to take the train to Millbrook to visit her mother at the assisted living facility. How was she supposed to explain this? How was she supposed to explain any of this? Her phone rang again. This time it was Ivy, and Chloe knew her friend wouldn't give up until she answered. "Don't even think about lying to me," Ivy said the moment Chloe picked up. "I've been watching the news for 3 hours. They're calling you Cinderella and the housekeeper who stole a billionaire's heart. What the hell happened?" "I don't know," Chloe whispered. And it was the truth. "He just kissed me. Out of nowhere. And then there were cameras and—" "Wait, hold up. You mean this wasn't planned? You're not actually dating him?" "No, God, no. I've worked at his house for 2 weeks. We've maybe exchanged 10 words total." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Chloe," Ivy said slowly, "you need to be very careful here. Men like Ethan Wakefield don't just kiss random women. There's always an angle." Before Chloe could respond, someone knocked on her door. At 3 a.m., her blood ran cold. "Ivy, someone's here. Don't answer it. It's probably reporters." The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Then a voice, deep, familiar, and completely unexpected. "Chloe, it's Ethan. I know you're in there. We need to talk." Ivy's voice crackled through the phone. Did he just say? Chloe hung up and stared at her front door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Ethan Wakefield was standing outside her crummy Queens apartment at 3 in the morning, and she had absolutely no idea what he wanted. But something told her that whatever he was about to say would change everything, and not necessarily for the better. Chloe opened the door just wide enough to see Ethan's face, keeping the chain lock firmly in place. He looked different than he had at the gala. His bow tie was gone, his white dress shirt was wrinkled and unbuttoned at the collar, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Dark, tired, and filled with something that looked almost like desperation. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly, conscious of her thin apartment walls and sleeping neighbors. "I know." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize. "But I couldn't leave things the way they were. Can I come in, please?" Chloe hesitated. Every instinct told her to slam the door and pretend this nightmare would disappear by morning, but the exhaustion in his voice made her pause. 5 minutes, she said, unlatching the chain. Ethan stepped into her tiny apartment, and immediately the space felt even smaller. He was tall, maybe 6'2", and his presence seemed to fill every corner of her modest home. His gaze swept over the fold-out couch, the stack of bills on her coffee table, the small framed photo of her and her mother at last year's county fair. "Nice place," he said, and to her surprise there was no condescension in his voice. "Don't." Chloe crossed her arms, staying near the door. "Don't pretend to be polite, just tell me why you're here and then leave." Ethan sat down heavily on her couch, his head in his hands. "I've spent the last 4 hours with my father's lawyers trying to figure out how to fix this mess." "Fix it?" Chloe's voice rose slightly. "You mean fix the fact that you kissed your housekeeper in front of a photographer? Because I'm pretty sure an apology and a severance check would handle that just fine. It's not that simple." He looked up at her and she saw something raw in his expression. "That photographer? He works for Page 6. The story's already online." By tomorrow morning, it'll be in every newspaper from here to Los Angeles. Chloe sank into her only chair, a second-hand dining room piece she'd bought at a thrift store. What are you saying? I'm saying that as of tonight, the entire world thinks you're my girlfriend, and there's no putting that genie back in the bottle. The words hit her like a physical blow. But that's insane. We can just tell them the truth, that it was a mistake, that you barely know me. Can we? Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Because the truth is that I was supposed to announce my engagement to Emery Kensington tonight. Instead, I kissed another woman in front of half of Manhattan's social elite. Do you know what that makes me look like? Like someone who made a stupid decision? Like someone who's been having an affair behind his fiancé's back. Chloe stared at him. But you're not engaged, are you? Technically, no. But everyone expected it to happen tonight. Including Emery. Including my father. His laugh was bitter. 3 hours ago, Charles Wakefield was ready to disown me. Then his head of PR had what he called a brilliant idea. A cold dread settled in Chloe's stomach. What kind of idea? Ethan stood up and began pacing her small living room, 3 steps in each direction. What if we don't deny the relationship? What if instead we confirm it? Are you out of your mind? Think about it, he said, turning to face her. A powerful CEO falling in love with an ordinary woman? It's a fairy tale. It makes me look human instead of like a cold corporate machine, and it gets me out of a marriage I never wanted in the first place. Chloe stood up so quickly her chair nearly toppled over. Absolutely not, I won't be part of some elaborate lie. It wouldn't be forever, Ethan said quickly. Just long enough for the media attention to die down. Maybe 3 months, 6 at the most. My lawyer drew up a contract. A contract? Chloe's voice was incredulous. You want me to sign a contract to be your fake girlfriend? It would protect both of us. Confidentiality clauses, financial compensation, clear boundaries about what's expected. Stop. Chloe held up her hand. Just stop talking. She walked to her kitchenette and poured herself a glass of water with hands that trembled slightly. Outside her window, she could see the first hints of dawn creeping across the Queen's skyline. In a few hours, her mother would be waking up in the assisted living facility, expecting her weekly visit. Her normal, quiet, uncomplicated life was supposed to resume. How much? She asked without turning around. What? Financial compensation? How much are we talking about? There was a pause. $200,000. Chloe nearly dropped her glass. $200,000 would pay off her mother's medical bills, cover the facility costs for the next 2 years, and maybe, just maybe, give her a chance to finish the nursing degree she'd had to abandon. She turned around to find Ethan watching her carefully. That's a lot of money, she said quietly. It's nothing compared to what this could cost me if it goes wrong. Chloe looked at him, really looked at him. The exhaustion, the desperation, the way he seemed almost fragile despite his obvious wealth and power. You're scared, she realized. Terrified, he admitted. Of my father, of the board, of spending the rest of my life married to someone I can barely stand to be in the same room with. For a moment, they stared at each other across her tiny apartment. 2 people from completely different worlds, both trapped by circumstances neither of them had chosen. Finally, Chloe set down her water glass. I want to see the contract, she said, and the moment the words left her mouth, she knew there was no going back. 3 days later, Chloe sat across from Ethan's lawyer in a glass conference room that overlooked Central Park, feeling like she'd stepped into another universe. The law firm of Morrison & Associates occupied 3 floors of a Manhattan skyscraper, where even the coffee cups probably cost more than her monthly rent. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Diana Morrison, slid a thick document across the mahogany table with the efficiency of someone who negotiated million-dollar deals before breakfast. Standard relationship agreement, Diana said, as if fake dating contracts were as common as parking tickets. Duration of 6 months, renewable by mutual consent. Financial compensation of $200,000 paid in monthly installments. Confidentiality clauses protect both parties. Chloe picked up the contract with hands that weren't quite steady. The legal language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out at her. Public appearances, social media coordination, intimate gestures as required for authenticity. Intimate gestures? She asked, looking up. Diana's expression didn't change. Hand-holding, casual touching, the occasional kiss for photographers. Nothing beyond what a real couple would do in public. Ethan, who had been silent since they'd arrived, finally spoke. The goal is to make it believable, not uncomfortable. Chloe turned to study his profile. He was wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months, his hair perfectly styled, every inch the powerful CEO. But she remembered how he'd looked in her apartment, vulnerable, desperate, almost broken. "What about your real life?" she asked. "Your father, your friends, What about Emery Kensington?" "Emery's family released a statement yesterday," Ethan said. "They're disappointed but wish me well in my new relationship." Translation: "They're furious, but they won't make a public scene." "And your father?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Charles is adapting to the situation." Diana cleared her throat. "There are specific clauses about family interactions. You'll attend certain social functions together, maintain the appearance of a committed relationship, and avoid any behavior that might suggest the arrangement is artificial." Chloe flipped through more pages, her head spinning. "What about my job? My life? You'll no longer be employed as domestic staff," Diana said smoothly. "Officially, you'll be listed as a consultant for Wakefield Industries' Community Outreach Program. It provides a reasonable explanation for how you met and gives you a legitimate income source." "Community outreach," Chloe repeated. "I don't know anything about community outreach." "You'll learn," Ethan said. "I'll make sure you have support." Chloe set the contract down and looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. Somewhere out there, her mother was sitting in a rehabilitation center, struggling to button her own shirts because of the arthritis that had gotten progressively worse over the past year. The medical bills were mounting, and Chloe's minimum wage cleaning jobs barely covered the basic facility costs, let alone the specialized treatments her mother needed. $200,000 would change everything. But at what cost? "I need guarantees," she said suddenly. Diana raised an eyebrow. "What kind of guarantees?" "I want it in writing that this stays professional. No, expectations beyond what's outlined in the contract, and I want the right to end the arrangement if I feel unsafe or uncomfortable." "Done," Ethan said immediately. "And I want to visit my mother every Sunday, no exceptions, no matter what social events are scheduled." "Of course." Chloe took a deep breath. "One more thing. I want to meet with someone, a therapist or counselor, to help me navigate this. Someone who isn't connected to your world. And I want that covered as an expense." Diana made a note. "We can add a wellness clause." For several minutes, the only sound in the room was the scratch of Diana's pen as she made amendments to the contract. Chloe watched Ethan from the corner of her eye. He was staring out the window, his expression unreadable. "Why me?" she asked quietly. He turned to look at her. "What? Out of all the women in that hotel, all the people you could have kissed to create a scandal? Why me?" Ethan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he said, "Because you looked at me like I was just a person. Not a bank account, not a business opportunity, just a person. I haven't had that in a very long time." Something in his voice made her chest tighten. For a moment she forgot about the contract, the money, the impossibility of their situation. She just saw a man who seemed as lost as she was. Diana cleared her throat. "If you're both satisfied with the terms, we can proceed with signing." Chloe picked up the expensive pen Diana offered her. It felt heavier than it should have, weighted with the magnitude of what she was about to do. 6 months, she said. 6 months, Ethan confirmed. "And then we go back to our separate lives." "Exactly." Chloe signed her name at the bottom of the contract with careful, deliberate strokes. When she set the pen down, Diana smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. "Congratulations," the lawyer said. "You're officially New York's newest power couple." As they left the building together, Ethan's hand settled naturally at the small of her back, their first public touch as a fake couple. But the warmth that spread through her at his touch felt anything but artificial. And that, Chloe realized, might be the most dangerous part of this whole arrangement. 2 weeks into their arrangement, Chloe stood in front of a three-way mirror at Bergdorf Goodman, feeling like an imposter in a $1,500 dress. "The sapphire brings out your eyes," said Vivian, the personal stylist Ethan had hired. The woman circled Chloe like a predator, adjusting the dress's neckline with the precision of a surgeon. "Mr. Wakefield specifically requested elegant but approachable. This says sophisticated girlfriend, not gold digger." Chloe winced. Even the stylist knew this was all an act. "Is this really necessary?" Chloe asked, smoothing the silk fabric nervously. "It's just lunch." "Just lunch?" Vivienne looked horrified. "Darling, this is lunch at Le Bernardin with the mayor's wife and 3 board members from the Metropolitan Museum. There will be photographers, society reporters, and at least 2 women who would kill to be in your position." That was exactly what Chloe was afraid of. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Running 10 minutes late. Car will pick you up at 12:30. You'll be fine. Easy for him to say. He'd been born into this world of charity luncheons and air kissing and conversations about summer houses in the Hamptons. Chloe had learned to navigate Manhattan subway delays and grocery store coupons. Deep breath, Vivian said, sensing her anxiety. Remember what we practiced. Shoulders back, subtle smile, and when in doubt, ask questions about other people. Rich women love talking about themselves. The car, a sleek black Mercedes with a driver who called her Miss Bennett, arrived precisely on time. As they glided through Manhattan traffic, Chloe tried to calm her nerves by reviewing the briefing materials Ethan's assistant had prepared. Notes about each woman who would be at lunch, their husbands' businesses, their charitable interests, even their preferred conversational topics. It felt like studying for an exam she was destined to fail. Le Bernardin was everything Chloe had expected. Understated elegance, pristine white tablecloths, and waiters who moved like dancers. She spotted Ethan immediately, standing near their table in a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his body. When he saw her, something shifted in his expression. Not the polite smile he wore for cameras, but something warmer, more genuine. "You look beautiful," he said, and for a moment she almost believed he meant it. He kissed her cheek, a soft brush of lips against skin that was entirely for show but sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. "Breathe," he whispered against her ear. "They're just people." But they weren't just people. They were the kind of women who appeared in society magazines, who threw fundraisers that raised millions, who had never worried about whether they could afford groceries and medication in the same week. Ethan, darling, a woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair approached their table, arms outstretched. "And this must be the famous Chloe we've all been dying to meet." The woman was Margaret Rothschild, wife of a federal judge and president of the Children's Hospital Foundation. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were assessing, taking in every detail of Chloe's appearance, cataloging and evaluating. "Mrs. Rothschild," Chloe said, extending her hand. "Thank you for including me. Please call me Margaret. We're practically family now." Her laugh was musical, practiced. "Tell me, how are you adjusting to all this attention? It must be quite overwhelming." It was a loaded question, and they both knew it. Chloe could feel the other women at the table listening, waiting to see how she would handle herself. "It's definitely been an adjustment," Chloe said carefully, "but Ethan's been very patient with me." Under the table, she felt Ethan's hand cover hers. Warm, steady, reassuring. "And how did you two meet?" asked another woman, Felicity Morrison, whose husband owned half the commercial real estate in Midtown. "The papers have been so vague about the details." Chloe felt her throat go dry. They'd rehearsed this story, but sitting here under the scrutiny of these polished women, her mind went blank. "Actually," Ethan said smoothly, "Chloe was consulting on a community development project for Wakefield Industries. We kept finding excuses to extend our meetings." "Community development," Margaret repeated as if tasting the words. "How refreshing. So many young women these days have no interest in giving back." "I think everyone wants to help," Chloe said, finding her voice. "Sometimes people just need the right opportunity." "Spoken like someone who understands real need," said the third woman, Victoria Ashworth, whose tone was impossible to read. The comment hung in the air like a challenge. Chloe felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, Ethan's thumb stroked across her knuckles, a small gesture that somehow gave her courage. "I think understanding need is important," Chloe said quietly. "It makes you grateful for what you have, and it makes you want to help others who might be struggling." Margaret smiled, and this time it seemed genuine. "Well said. Tell me, what causes are you most passionate about?" For the next hour, Chloe found herself talking about healthcare accessibility, about the challenges facing working families, about the assisted living facility where her mother lived, and the amazing staff who treated every resident with dignity despite being overworked and underpaid. She forgot to monitor her posture, forgot to worry about using the right fork, forgot that she was supposed to be playing a role. And somewhere in the middle of describing a volunteer reading program at her mother's facility, she realized that Ethan was staring at her with an expression she'd never seen before, something that looked almost like admiration. "You should come speak at our next fundraiser," Margaret said as they prepared to leave. "We need more authentic voices like yours." Outside the restaurant, as they waited for the car, Ethan turned to her. "That was incredible," he said. "You were incredible. I messed up the story about how we met. You were honest about things that matter. That's worth more than a perfect rehearsed story." Chloe looked up at him, trying to read his expression. Was that part of the performance? Making me sound like some kind of inspirational figure? No, he said, and his voice was serious. That was just you being yourself, and it was the most real thing that's happened to me in years. As the car pulled up, Chloe caught their reflection in the restaurant window. A handsome man in an expensive suit with his arm around a woman in a designer dress looking for all the world like they belonged together. For just a moment, she let herself imagine what it would be like if none of it was pretend. The call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night, while Chloe was reviewing marketing materials for Wakefield Industries' community outreach program. Miss Bennett? The voice was unfamiliar, professional. This is Dr. Patterson from Millbrook Care Center. I'm calling about your mother. Chloe's blood turned to ice. What happened? She's stable, the doctor said quickly. But she had a fall earlier this evening. We think she may have fractured her wrist. We need to take her to the hospital for x-rays, but she's refusing to go unless you're here. I'll be right there, Chloe said, already reaching for her keys. Miss Bennett, it's nearly midnight. The last train to Millbrook left 2 hours ago. Chloe sank back onto her couch, the phone clutched in her hand. A taxi would cost more than she made in a week, and rideshare apps were quoting astronomical surge pricing for the 100-mile trip. She scrolled through her contacts, but who could she call? Ivy was working the night shift at the diner. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was 83 and didn't drive after dark, and she certainly couldn't. Her finger hovered over Ethan's number. They'd exchanged personal phone numbers as part of their arrangement, but she'd never used his except to confirm meeting times and public appearances. Calling him at midnight asking for help with something so personal felt like crossing a line they'd carefully maintained. But her mother was hurt and scared, and Chloe was out of options. Ethan, she said when he answered on the second ring, sounding fully awake despite the late hour. Chloe, what's wrong? The concern in his voice was immediate, genuine, and it nearly undid her. I'm sorry to call so late. My mother, she fell and they think she broke her wrist and she won't go to the hospital unless I'm there, but I can't. Her voice cracked. I can't get there. Where is she? Millbrook Care Center. It's upstate, about 2 hours north, but I'll pick you up in 20 minutes. Ethan, no, you don't have to. 20 minutes, Chloe. The line went dead. Exactly 19 minutes later, Chloe watched from her window as a silver Aston Martin pulled up outside her building. Ethan climbed out wearing jeans and a black sweater, looking nothing like the polished CEO she'd grown used to seeing. You didn't have to come yourself, she said as she got into the passenger seat. You could have sent a driver. Your mother is hurt, he said simply, pulling into traffic. Where else would I be? The drive north was mostly quiet, broken only by Chloe's occasional directions and the soft hum of the car's engine. Manhattan's glittering skyline gave way to suburban streetlights, then to the dark stretches of highway lined with trees. Chloe found herself stealing glances at Ethan's profile, illuminated by the dashboard lights. Tell me about her, he said suddenly. What? Your mother. What's she like? Chloe was quiet for a moment, unsure how to explain Dorothy Bennett to someone who lived in Ethan's world. She's stubborn, fiercely independent. She worked 2 jobs to put me through high school, cleaning houses during the day, stocking shelves at the grocery store at night. When the arthritis got bad, she tried to hide it from me for almost a year because she didn't want to be a burden. Sounds like someone else I know. Chloe looked at him sharply. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, he said, but there was something soft in his expression. Just that strength seems to run in your family. They arrived at Millbrook Care Center at 1:30 a.m. The facility was quiet, lit only by emergency lighting and the glow from the nurse's station. Chloe hurried down the familiar hallway to room 247, Ethan following silently behind her. Dorothy Bennett was sitting on the edge of her bed, cradling her left wrist against her chest. At 62, she was still beautiful. Silver hair that Chloe had inherited, the same green eyes, the same stubborn set to her jaw. Mom, Chloe said, rushing to her side. There's my girl, Dorothy said, her voice tight with pain. I told them you'd come. Of course I came. What happened? Stupid, really. I was trying to reach something on the top shelf in the activity room. Lost my balance. Dorothy's eyes moved past Chloe to where Ethan stood in the doorway. And who might this be? Chloe felt her cheeks warm. Mom, this is Ethan. Ethan Wakefield. Ah, Dorothy said, and there was something knowing in her tone. The famous boyfriend. Mrs. Bennett, Ethan said, stepping forward. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Dorothy studied him with the sharp eyes of a woman who'd spent her life reading people. You're not what I expected. Mom, Chloe warned. What? I expected someone more polished, more artificial. Dorothy looked Ethan up and down. You drove her here yourself. At 1 in the morning. Your daughter was worried about you, Ethan said simply. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Well, since you're here, you might as well make yourself useful. Help me get to this X-ray machine so we can get this over with. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of hospital waiting rooms, paperwork, and tests. Dorothy's wrist was indeed fractured, but it was a clean break that would heal with proper care. By the time they got back to Millbrook, dawn was breaking over the Hudson Valley. I should get you home, Ethan said as they walked back to the car. Actually, Dorothy called from her window, I was hoping you could both stay for breakfast. The facility serves a decent meal, and I'd like to get to know the man who drove through the night for my daughter. Chloe looked at Ethan apologetically. You don't have to. I'd like that, he said. An hour later, they sat in the facility's modest dining room, sharing pancakes and coffee with a dozen other residents. Ethan listened intently as Dorothy told stories about Chloe's childhood, laughed at her mother's sharp observations about the other residents, and helped an elderly man named Frank with his crossword puzzle. He's different than I thought he'd be, Dorothy whispered to Chloe when Ethan stepped away to take a phone call. Different how? Kind. Real. Dorothy squeezed Chloe's hand with her good one. The way he looks at you, that's not fake, sweetheart. Mom, it's complicated. The best things usually are. On the drive back to the city, Chloe found herself stealing glances at Ethan again. His hair was messy, his expensive sweater wrinkled, and there was a small syrup stain on his sleeve from helping Frank with his breakfast. He looked human, approachable, real. Thank you, she said quietly, for last night, for staying, for everything. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. That was above and beyond any contract. Ethan was quiet for several miles. Finally, he said, It stopped being about the contract somewhere around the time you told Margaret Rothschild about your mother's reading program. Chloe's heart skipped. What are you saying? I'm saying that spending the morning with your mother and watching you take care of her, it reminded me what real love looks like. The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to address. But as Manhattan's skyline came into view, Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them, and there was no contract in the world that could define what that meant. The knock on Chloe's apartment door came at 7 p.m. on a Saturday, which was unusual because Ethan always called first. She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, still wearing his suit from whatever business meeting had consumed his day, but his tie was loosened and his hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it. We have a problem, he said without preamble. Hello to you too, Chloe said, stepping aside to let him in. What kind of problem? Emory Kensington is hosting a charity auction next Friday. Some cause for underprivileged children. Ironic, considering she's never spent 5 minutes with an actual underprivileged child in her life. Ethan began his familiar pacing routine in her small living room. She specifically requested that we attend. Requested? Demanded. Through her publicist, who called my assistant, who called my father's assistant, who called my father. Ethan's laugh was harsh. It's a power play. She wants to see us together, wants to evaluate the competition. Chloe sank onto her couch. So we go. We've done plenty of public events. This is different. Ethan stopped pacing and looked at her. This isn't some society lunch where everyone pretends to be polite. Emery's angry, and she's smart, and she's going to do everything she can to expose us. Expose us how? By testing us. Asking questions only a real couple would know the answers to. Watching for inconsistencies in our story. Ethan sat down beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that she'd grown to associate with safety. She's going to try to prove we're fake. The irony wasn't lost on Chloe. Because we are fake. Are we? The question hung between them like a live wire. Chloe looked at him, really looked at him. The exhaustion in his dark eyes, the slight stubble on his jaw because he'd been too busy to shave that morning. The way his presence in her apartment had somehow stopped feeling intrusive and started feeling like coming home. Ethan, she said carefully, what are you asking me? I'm asking if what happened between us at the hospital with your mother, if the way I feel when I'm with you, I'm asking if any of that feels fake to you. Chloe's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. It doesn't matter how it feels. We have a contract, an expiration date. Contracts can be renegotiated. Can they? Chloe stood up abruptly, needing distance. Because last I checked, you're still Ethan Wakefield, billionaire CEO, and I'm still the housekeeper you kissed to avoid an arranged marriage. You're not just a housekeeper. Ethan said quietly. You haven't been for a long time. Then what am I? The question came out sharper than she'd intended, but she was tired of living in this strange liminal space between real and pretend, tired of analyzing every gesture and wondering what it meant. Ethan stood and moved toward her, slowly, like she might bolt. You're the woman who challenges me in board meetings even though you've only been working there for a month. You're the person who makes me want to be better than my father expects me to be. He stopped, just inches away from her. You're the first person I've ever met who makes me feel like myself. We barely know each other, Chloe whispered. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. She knew how he took his coffee. Black, no sugar. Knew that he called his assistant when he was nervous. Knew that he donated anonymously to 3 different children's charities because he'd never had a real childhood himself. I know that you send your mother flowers every Tuesday because they brighten her week, Ethan said. I know that you refuse to buy anything for yourself, but you'll spend your last $20 on groceries for your elderly neighbor. I know that you read to the kids at the community center on Saturday mornings even though it's not part of your job description. How do you? Because I pay attention to you, he said simply. Because everything you do matters to me. Chloe felt tears prick her eyes. This is crazy. We're from different worlds. So what happens when this ends? When the media loses interest and you don't need me anymore? What if it doesn't have to end? Before she could respond, Ethan's phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. He pulled it out with a frustrated sigh, then went very still. What? Chloe asked. Without a word, he showed her the screen. It was a text from his assistant. Emergency. Check page 6. Call me immediately. Chloe's stomach dropped. What did they find? Ethan was already pulling up the website on his phone. When the page loaded, his face went pale. The headline read, Fake Romance. Sources close to Wakefield Industries. Question CEO's relationship. Below it was a grainy photo of them leaving the law office where they'd signed their contract, accompanied by quotes from anonymous sources, suggesting that their relationship was a publicity stunt designed to avoid his arranged marriage. Someone leaked, Ethan said quietly. Who would? Chloe stopped. Diana Morrison, your lawyer. No. Diana's bound by attorney-client privilege. Ethan's jaw tightened. But someone with access to our meetings, someone who knew the timeline. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his father's name. Charles, Ethan answered, his voice carefully neutral. Even from across the room, Chloe could hear the older man's angry voice through the speaker. Words like embarrassment and scandal and damage control filtered through. I understand, Ethan said finally. Yes, I'll handle it. He hung up and looked at Chloe with an expression she'd never seen before. Defeat. He knows, Ethan said. About the contract. About everything. He's calling an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. What does that mean? It means unless we can prove that our relationship is real, that this isn't some elaborate publicity stunt, he's going to force me out of the company. Ethan sat down heavily on her couch. 36 years of my life and he's willing to destroy me over this. Chloe felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. Then we prove it. How? The auction. Friday night. We go, and we show everyone, including Emery Kensington and your father, that what we have is real. Chloe, Ethan said carefully, if we do that, if we cross that line, there's no going back. No more pretending. No more contracts. It would have to be real. Chloe looked at him. This man who had driven through the night to help her mother, who listened when she talked about things that mattered, who made her feel like she was worth something more than cleaning other people's houses. Maybe it already is real, she said quietly. And when Ethan kissed her this time, there were no cameras, no witnesses, no contracts, just 2 people who had found something neither of them had been looking for. The Metropolitan Club had never looked more intimidating. Chloe stood beside Ethan at the entrance to the grand ballroom, her hand resting in the crook of his arm, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. The charity auction was in full swing. Manhattan's elite mingling beneath crystal chandeliers, bidding on luxury vacations and original artwork, while servers in white gloves circulated with champagne. Remember, Ethan murmured close to her ear, we're here because we want to be. Together. Nothing else matters. Chloe nodded, but her stomach was twisted in knots. Since the page 6 article 3 days ago, she'd felt like she was living under a microscope. Photographers followed her to the grocery store. Reporters called her mother's care facility. Her every move was being analyzed and dissected by people who had already decided she didn't belong in Ethan's world. Ethan, Darling. The voice cut through the crowd like a blade. Emery Kensington glided toward them, resplendent in a white designer gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. She was beautiful in the way that only money and genetics could create. Tall, blonde, with the kind of bone structure that photographed perfectly from every angle. Emery, Ethan said politely. Thank you for the invitation. Of course. I simply had to meet the woman who stole you away from me. Emery's smile was radiant and sharp as glass. She turned to Chloe with eyes like blue ice. You must be Chloe. I've heard so much about you. Nothing too scandalous, I hope, Chloe managed, extending her hand. Emery's grip was firm, calculated. Oh, I never listen to gossip. I prefer to form my own opinions. Her gaze swept over Chloe's dress. A midnight blue gown that Vivian had chosen. Elegant, but understated. That's a lovely dress, Valentino? I'm not sure, Chloe said honestly. The stylist picked it out. Ah, Emery's smile widened. How refreshing. Most women in our circle are obsessed with designers. But then, you're not really from our circle, are you? The words were delivered with perfect sweetness, but the message was crystal clear. You don't belong here. No, Chloe said quietly. I'm not. How fascinating. Tell me, how does someone from, where was it, Queens? How does someone like you end up with Manhattan's most eligible bachelor? Chloe felt Ethan tense beside her, but before he could intervene, she spoke. Luck, I suppose. Being in the right place at the right time. Luck, Emery repeated as if tasting the word. How wonderfully honest. Most women would claim it was destiny or true love. Maybe they would, Chloe said. But I've never been very good at pretty lies. Something flickered in Emery's eyes. Surprise. Perhaps even respect. No, I don't imagine you are. Well, I do hope you'll enjoy the auction. We're raising money for the Children's Education Foundation, though I suppose you're more familiar with the practical side of need than most of us here. It was another carefully crafted insult, but this time Chloe didn't flinch. I am, she said, and that's exactly why causes like this matter. Every child deserves the chance to dream bigger than their circumstances. How inspiring, Emery said, but her tone had shifted slightly. Less predatory, more curious. You'll have to tell me more about your work with Wakefield Industries' community outreach program. I'm always looking for authentic voices for our foundation. Before Chloe could respond, a man in an expensive tuxedo approached their group. Charles Wakefield moved with the same commanding presence as his son, but where Ethan's intensity felt protective, his father's felt calculating. Emery, you look radiant as always, Charles said, kissing her cheek. And Ethan? His gaze moved to Chloe, cool and assessing. Miss Bennett, Mr. Wakefield, Chloe replied, fighting the urge to step closer to Ethan. I trust you're enjoying the evening? Very much, she said. It's a wonderful cause. Yes, Emery has always been passionate about children's education. Haven't you, my dear? Charles's smile was sharp. She's been volunteering with disadvantaged youth since she was 16. Quite admirable. The implication was clear. Unlike some people, Emery belonged in this world of charity and social responsibility. That's amazing, Chloe said genuinely. What kind of work do you do with the children? For the first time, Emery looked slightly uncomfortable. Oh, various things. Fundraising mostly, event planning. Chloe reads to children at the community center, Ethan said quietly. Every Saturday morning. How lovely, Charles said, but his tone suggested it was anything but. And tell me, Miss Bennett, what are your long-term goals? Your career aspirations? The question felt like a trap. Chloe knew what he was really asking. What do you want from my son? I'd like to finish my nursing degree, she said. Healthcare is something I'm passionate about, especially after watching my mother navigate the system. Nursing, Charles repeated. How practical. Practical and necessary, Ethan said, his voice carrying a warning edge. Chloe's work with our community outreach program has already made a real difference. I'm sure it has, Charles said smoothly. Though I imagine the learning curve must be steep coming from such a different background. It is, Chloe admitted. But I'm learning that sometimes being an outsider gives you a clearer perspective on what really needs to change. The conversation was interrupted by the auctioneer calling for attention. As the crowd began to move toward the stage, Emery touched Chloe's arm. Walk with me, she said. They stepped away from the men, finding a quieter corner near the tall windows that overlooked Central Park. You're not what I expected, Emery said without preamble. What did you expect? Someone easier to dismiss? Someone obviously after his money. Emery studied Chloe's face. But you're not, are you? After his money, I mean. No, Chloe said. I'm not. Then what are you after? It was a fair question, and Chloe found herself answering honestly. I don't know. 3 months ago, I thought I had my life figured out. Work hard, save money, take care of my mother. Simple. And then Ethan kissed me in that hallway, and everything got complicated. Complicated how? Chloe looked across the room to where Ethan stood with his father, his posture tense, his jaw set in the stubborn line she'd come to recognize. He makes me want things I never thought I could have, and that terrifies me. Emery was quiet for a long moment. You know he's never going to have a normal life, don't you? The pressure, the scrutiny, the expectations, it never stops. I'm beginning to understand that. And you know his father will never accept you. Not really. You'll always be the housekeeper who got lucky. Chloe felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. Maybe, but I won't let anyone, including Charles Wakefield, make me feel ashamed of who I am or where I come from. Emery's laugh was unexpected, genuine, even admiring. God, I can see why he fell for you. You have steel in your spine. She paused. The contract story, is it true? Chloe met her gaze steadily. Does it matter? It might. To the board. To the media. The contract was real, Chloe said quietly. But what happened after? That was real too. And now? Now I'm here, aren't I? Standing in a room full of people who think I don't belong. Because he asked me to. Because this, she gestured between them and across the room toward Ethan. This matters to me. Emery nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think you're good for him. He looks at you like you hung the moon. And how does he look at you? Like I'm a business obligation he's relieved to be rid of. Emery's smile was rueful. Believe it or not, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. Before Chloe could ask what she meant, the auctioneer's voice boomed across the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, our next item is a private dinner prepared by Chef Marcus Williams, with all proceeds benefiting our scholarship fund. Do I hear opening bids? $50,000. Charles Wakefield's voice rang out clearly. The crowd murmured appreciatively. It was a generous bid, but Chloe knew it wasn't about charity. It was about power, about showing everyone in the room that Charles Wakefield could afford to throw around money like confetti. $75,000, called another voice. $100,000, Charles countered immediately. Chloe watched Ethan's face as his father continued to bid, escalating the price far beyond reasonable. This wasn't about supporting children's education. This was Charles showing off, asserting dominance, reminding everyone who held the real power in the Wakefield family. $200,000, Ethan said suddenly. The room went silent. Father and son stared at each other across the ballroom, tension crackling between them like electricity. $250,000, Charles said, his voice dangerously quiet. $300,000, Ethan replied without hesitation. Chloe realized she was holding her breath. This wasn't about a dinner anymore. This was about Ethan finally standing up to his father, publicly, in front of everyone who mattered in their world. $500,000, Charles said. The number hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, the crowd watched in fascinated silence, sensing they were witnessing something momentous. Ethan looked across the room at Chloe, and she saw something in his eyes. Determination, resolve, and something that looked like freedom. $1 million, he said clearly. And in that moment, Chloe knew that whatever happened next, there was no going back. The silence in the Wakefield Industries boardroom was deafening. Monday morning had arrived with all the subtlety of a freight train, and Chloe sat in the hallway outside the conference room, listening to the muffled voices of 12 board members deciding Ethan's fate. Through the glass walls, she could see his silhouette at the head of the long table, his posture rigid with tension. She shouldn't be here. The meeting was private, executive level only, but Ethan had asked her to come, and she couldn't abandon him now, not when everything was falling apart. Miss Bennett? Chloe looked up to see Diana Morrison approaching, her expression grim. They're asking for you. For me? Charles is demanding answers. About the contract, about the timeline, about whether any of this is real. Diana's voice was carefully neutral. You don't have to go in there, you could walk away right now. Chloe stood, smoothing her simple black dress, the most professional outfit she owned. And let them destroy him? No. The boardroom felt like a courtroom as Chloe entered. 12 of the most powerful people in New York's business world sat around a mahogany table that probably cost more than her annual salary. At the far end, Charles Wakefield presided like a judge, his expression cold and calculating. "Miss Bennet," he said without preamble, "please sit." Chloe took the empty chair beside Ethan, acutely aware of every eye in the room focused on her. Ethan's hand found hers under the table, warm, steady, reassuring. "I think we can dispense with pleasantries," Charles continued. "This board has serious concerns about recent events that have brought unwanted attention to our company. Specifically, allegations that my son's relationship with you is fabricated." "Allegations?" Chloe kept her voice level. "Or facts?" A murmur ran around the table. Charles's eyes sharpened. "I beg your pardon?" "You seem to have already made up your minds," Chloe said. "So why am I here? To provide entertainment? To watch you humiliate your son in front of his colleagues?" "Chloe," Ethan warned quietly, but she pressed on. "Because if that's what this is, then you're right to be concerned about the company's reputation. Not because of our relationship, but because of how this board treats its own leadership." Charles's face darkened. "Young lady, you forget yourself." "No, I don't. I know exactly who I am and where I come from. The question is whether you know who your son is." "I know my son perfectly well. I also know opportunists when I see them." The words hit like a slap, but Chloe didn't flinch. "You're right. I am an opportunist. I saw an opportunity to help someone I care about escape a marriage that would have made him miserable. I saw an opportunity to use my position to actually make a difference in people's lives through the community outreach program. And yes, I saw an opportunity to pay for my mother's medical care." She stood, still holding Ethan's hand. "But most importantly, I saw an opportunity to love someone who deserves to be loved for who he is, not what he represents to his father's business empire." "Love," Charles repeated mockingly. "How convenient. Tell me, Miss Bennet, when did this great love affair begin? Before or after you signed a contract worth $200,000? Chloe felt Ethan tense beside her, but she squeezed his hand and continued. "It began the night he drove me to see my mother in the hospital. Not because he had to, not because it was in any contract, but because he's a good man who cares about the people in his life." "How touching," Charles said. "And I suppose you expect us to believe—" "I don't expect you to believe anything," Chloe interrupted. "But I'll tell you what I know. I know that Ethan hasn't just met every performance target you've set for the past 5 years. He's exceeded them. I know that under his leadership this company has become a leader in sustainable energy, creating thousands of jobs and setting industry standards." She looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each board member. "I also know that he's built a community outreach program that's already provided scholarships to 43 students, funded 3 new after-school programs, and partnered with local organizations to create job training opportunities for people who need them most." "All very admirable," said Dr. Margaret Kingston, one of the few women on the board. "But the question remains, can this company afford to have its CEO's personal life become a source of ongoing controversy? Can this company afford to lose the best leader it's ever had because he refused to marry a woman he doesn't love?" Chloe shot back. "Miss Bennet," Charles's voice was ice cold, "you seem to have forgotten that this company belongs to the Wakefield family, not to you, and not even entirely to my son. Then maybe it's time that changed." The words came from Ethan, spoken quietly but with absolute conviction. He stood, still holding Chloe's hand, and faced his father. "For 36 years, I've done everything you asked. I went to the schools you chose, studied the subjects you approved, took the job you offered. I've built this company into something that matters, something that makes a real difference. And you want to destroy all of that because I fell in love with someone you didn't pick for me." "Ethan," Charles warned. "No, I'm done letting you control my life." Ethan's voice grew stronger. "This board has a choice to make. You can keep a CEO who's grown your investments by 40% over 5 years, who's positioned this company as a leader in the fastest growing sector of the energy industry, and who happens to be in love with an extraordinary woman." He paused, looking around the table. "Or you can side with a man who's more interested in playing corporate chess than building a sustainable future. But if you choose the latter, you'll be doing it without me." The silence that followed was profound. Charles Wakefield's face had gone pale, then red, then pale again. "Are you threatening to quit?" Dr. Kingston asked. "I'm stating a fact," Ethan replied. "I won't continue to work for people who think my personal happiness is less important than maintaining some outdated notion of social hierarchy." "You'd throw away everything for her?" Charles's voice was barely controlled. Ethan looked at Chloe, and she saw her own feelings reflected in his eyes. Love, hope, and absolute certainty. "I'd throw away everything to be with her." he said simply. But I'm hoping I won't have to. The vote, when it came, was closer than Chloe had expected. 7 in favor of retaining Ethan as CEO, 5 opposed. Charles Wakefield voted against his own son. As the board members filed out, Charles approached them, his expression unreadable. "You've won this round," he said to Ethan. "But don't think this is over." "It is for me," Ethan replied. "I'm done playing your games, Dad." Charles turned to Chloe, his eyes cold. "I hope you understand what you've cost him. Friends, family connections, social standing." "I understand what I've given him," Chloe interrupted. "The chance to be happy." When they were finally alone in the boardroom, Ethan pulled Chloe into his arms. "I can't believe you did that," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Did what?" "Stood up to them." "To him. You were incredible." Chloe looked up at him. This man who had just risked everything for her. "So were you." "I meant what I said. About throwing everything away." "I know." She touched his face gently. "But you won't have to. We'll figure this out together." As they left the building together, Chloe felt the weight of what had just happened settling around them. They had won the battle, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the war was far from over. Because Charles Wakefield didn't seem like the kind of man who accepted defeat gracefully, and something in his parting words made her think he had one more card left to play. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, hand-delivered to Chloe's apartment by a courier who refused to wait for a signature. Inside was a single sheet of expensive letterhead from the law offices of Whitman, Sterling and Associates, along with a cashier's check that made Chloe's hands shake as she read the amount, $5 million. The letter was brief and devastating. "Miss Bennett, my client, Charles Wakefield, is prepared to offer you the enclosed sum in exchange for your immediate and permanent departure from his son's life. This includes termination of all personal and professional relationships, a binding non-disclosure agreement regarding your time with the Wakefield family, and your agreement to relocate outside of New York State. The offer expires at midnight tonight. Should you choose to decline, my client has authorized me to inform you that certain information regarding your mother's immigration status and past employment history may become of interest to federal authorities. We trust you will make the sensible decision. Sincerely, Harrison Whitman, Esquire." Chloe read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. Then she sat down heavily on her couch, the check fluttering to the floor. $5 million. Enough money to secure her mother's care for the rest of her life, to finish her nursing degree, to start over anywhere she wanted. All she had to do was walk away from Ethan and never look back. The threat was clear: take the money and disappear, or watch her mother face deportation proceedings over decades-old paperwork discrepancies that Charles had obviously dug up through his network of powerful contacts. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Dinner tonight? I have something important to tell you." Chloe stared at the message, then at the check on her floor, then at the photo of her and her mother on her coffee table. In the picture, they were both laughing at something off camera, her mother's eyes bright and free of the worry that had consumed her face since the arthritis had gotten worse. Dorothy Bennett had immigrated from Ireland 40 years ago, worked multiple jobs to support her daughter, and never once complained about the sacrifices she'd made. She didn't deserve to spend her final years living in fear because her daughter had fallen in love with the wrong man. But Ethan didn't deserve to be destroyed by his father's manipulations either. Chloe picked up her phone and called the only person who might understand. Ivy's diner. Her friend's voice came through the speaker, harried and tired. "Ivy, it's me. I need to see you. It's important." An hour later, they sat in a corner booth at the diner, the lunch rush swirling around them while Chloe explained everything. Ivy listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. "That bastard," Ivy said when Chloe finished. "He's threatening your mother?" "Essentially, yes. So what are you going to do?" Chloe stared into her coffee cup, watching the cream swirl in complicated patterns. "I don't know. If I take the money, my mother is safe, but Ethan will survive," Ivy said firmly. "He's rich, powerful, and devastatingly handsome. He'll find someone else." "Will he?" Chloe looked up at her friend. "Because I don't think this is about money or status for him. I think he actually loves me. And you love him." It wasn't a question. Ivy had known Chloe too long to be fooled by pretense. "Yeah," Chloe whispered. "I do. I love him so much it terrifies me." "Then fight for him." "How can I fight Charles Wakefield? He has lawyers, private investigators, connections I can't even imagine. He could destroy my mother with a phone call." Ivy leaned forward, her expression intense. "You know what your problem is? You think you're still that scared girl from Queens who doesn't deserve good things. But you're not. You're the woman who stood up to a room full of billionaires and made them listen. You're the woman who made Ethan Wakefield fall in love. You have more power than you think. What kind of power? The power of truth. The power of being right. Ivy's smile was fierce. And the power of having friends who won't let you go down without a fight. Before Chloe could ask what she meant, Ivy's expression shifted. Don't look now, but we're about to have company. Chloe turned to see Ethan walking through the diner's front door, his expensive suit completely out of place among the vinyl booths and laminated menus. He spotted her immediately and made his way over, his face tight with worry. I've been calling you, he said, sliding into the booth beside her. Your phone goes straight to voicemail. I turned it off. I needed to think. About what? Ethan's eyes found the envelope on the table between them. What's that? Chloe hesitated, then slid the letter across to him. She watched his face as he read, saw the moment comprehension hit, saw the flash of fury that darkened his eyes. Son of a bitch, he said quietly. He threatened your mother. It's not really a threat, Chloe said. More like a promise. Ethan crumpled the letter in his fist. He can't do this. I won't let him. How are you going to stop him? He has documentation, lawyers, connections in federal agencies. I have something better, Ethan said grimly. I have the truth about Charles Wakefield's business practices over the past 20 years. Financial records, emails, documented bribes to city planning officials. He looked at Chloe intently. I've been building a case for months ever since I realized he was planning to force me into marriage with Emery. What are you saying? I'm saying my father isn't the only one who can play dirty. Ethan's voice was steel. He wants to threaten the woman I love? Fine. But he won't like the consequences. Ivy, who had been listening in fascination, suddenly spoke up. What about the nuclear option? Both Ethan and Chloe turned to look at her. What nuclear option? Ethan asked. Ivy grinned. You tell the truth. All of it. To everyone. I don't understand, Chloe said. Think about it. Charles's whole power play depends on secrecy, on controlling the narrative. But what if you took that power away from him? What if you held a press conference and told the world exactly what happened? The contract, the fake relationship that became real, the threats against your mother, all of it. Ethan stared at her. That's actually brilliant. It's also career suicide, Chloe pointed out. Maybe, Ivy said. Or maybe it's the most authentic love story anyone's heard in years. Poor girl meets billionaire CEO. Fake relationship becomes real love. Evil father tries to destroy them both. Are you kidding me? Hollywood would fight over the movie rights. Chloe felt something shift inside her chest. A spark of possibility, of hope. The media already thinks they know our story, she said slowly. What if we gave them the real one? Ethan reached for her hand. Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. Every detail of our lives will be public. I'm tired of being afraid, Chloe said. And I'm tired of letting your father control our lives. That evening, they stood together outside the Meridian Hotel, the same place where their story had begun with an impulsive kiss and a photographer's flash. This time, though, they were the ones who had called the press conference. Ready? Ethan asked, adjusting his tie nervously. Chloe smoothed her dress, the same midnight blue gown she'd worn to the charity auction, because tonight was about owning every part of their journey. Ready? She said. They walked into the hotel's press room hand in hand, facing a sea of cameras and reporters. At the back of the room, Chloe spotted Charles Wakefield, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Ladies and gentlemen, Ethan began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. Thank you for coming. My name is Ethan Wakefield, and this is the woman I love, Chloe Bennett. We're here tonight to tell you a story, the real story of how we met, why we're together, and why love is worth fighting for. As Ethan began to speak, Chloe felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Freedom. They were done hiding, done pretending, done letting fear dictate their choices. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, and that, she realized, was the only thing that had ever really mattered. 6 months later, the morning sun filtered through the windows of the small coffee shop in Millbrook, casting golden shadows across the worn wooden tables where Chloe sat grading papers from her nursing program finals. 6 months had passed since that night at the Meridian Hotel, and the world looked completely different now. The press conference had indeed changed everything. Within hours, their story had gone viral. not as a scandal but as a modern fairy tale about authenticity triumphing over artifice. The hashtag, Our Real Love, had trended for weeks, and marriage proposals from strangers had flooded Chloe's social media accounts. More importantly, Charles Wakefield's threats had crumbled under public scrutiny. When immigration lawyers across the country offered to represent Dorothy Bennett pro bono, and when federal investigators began looking into Charles's own business practices, he had quietly retreated from the battlefield. 2 coffees, extra cream, and a blueberry muffin, said a familiar voice. Chloe looked up to see Ethan approaching her table, carrying a tray and wearing jeans and a simple gray sweater that made him look younger, more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "You're late," she said, accepting her coffee with a smile. "Board meeting ran long. Henderson is still adjusting to the new management structure." Ethan slid into the chair across from her, his eyes bright with satisfaction. "But we finalized the partnership with the state university system. 5 new scholarship programs, fully funded. The changes at Wakefield Industries had been swift and dramatic. Within a month of the press conference, 3 board members had resigned, including Charles, who had sold his remaining shares and moved to a villa in Monaco. Ethan had restructured the company around sustainable practices and community investment, turning their love story into a blueprint for corporate responsibility. "How did your mother's appointment go?" Ethan asked, reaching across the table to steal a piece of her muffin. "Clean x-rays. Full range of motion restored." Chloe's smile was radiant. "Dr. Martinez says she's healing better than patients half her age." Through the coffee shop window they could see Dorothy Bennett in the small garden behind the building, leading a group of elderly residents in what she called therapeutic gardening. The assisted living facility had hired her as their activities coordinator after her recovery, and she'd never been happier. "And how did your interview go?" Ethan asked, referring to Chloe's meeting with the head of pediatric nursing at Columbia Presbyterian. "They offered me the position." "Chloe, that's incredible." Ethan reached for her hand. "When do you start?" "I haven't accepted yet." Something in her tone made him pause. "Why not?" Chloe set down her coffee and looked at him. Really looked at him. The past 6 months had taught her to recognize every expression that crossed his face, every subtle shift in his mood. Right now he looked cautious, hopeful, and slightly nervous. "Because I'm waiting for someone to ask me a very important question," she said quietly. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. Then he laughed, a sound of pure joy that made several other customers turn to look at them. "You know," he said, standing and pulling something small in velvet from his pocket. "I had this whole elaborate plan. Dinner at Le Bernardin, roses, a string quartet." "I hate elaborate plans," Chloe said, but she was smiling so widely her cheeks hurt. "I know you do." Ethan dropped to one knee beside her chair, right there in the middle of the coffee shop, in front of her nursing textbooks and the elderly customers who had started to murmur excitedly. "Chloe Bennett, you've changed everything about my life. You've made me braver, kinder, more honest than I ever thought I could be." He opened the ring box to reveal a simple, elegant solitaire that caught the morning light perfectly. "I love your stubborn independence, your fierce loyalty, the way you make terrible coffee but refuse to admit it. I love how you read to children on Saturday mornings and how you argue with me about social policy during dinner." His voice grew softer. "I love that you saw something in me worth fighting for when I couldn't see it myself." Chloe felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but she didn't care. "Will you marry me?" Ethan asked. "Not because of any contract or arrangement or business deal, but because I can't imagine spending another day without you." "Yes," Chloe whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." The coffee shop erupted in applause as Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her thoroughly, right there among the mismatched tables and the smell of fresh pastries. "There's one more thing," Ethan said when they finally broke apart. "What?" He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "I bought something for us." Chloe opened the envelope to find a deed. "A house? 2 acres, 10 minutes from here. Big enough for your mother to have her own space. Close enough to the city for your new job with room for—" He paused, suddenly looking shy. "Well, room for whatever the future brings." Chloe looked at the deed, then at her engagement ring, then at this man who had learned to build a life around love instead of obligation. "What about Wakefield Industries? Your father's legacy? I'm keeping the parts that matter, the innovation, the community programs, the jobs. But I'm building something new, something that reflects our values, not his." Ethan's smile was soft. "Besides, I've discovered I'm much better at making decisions when I have the right partner." That evening, they sat on the porch of their new house, Still mostly empty but already feeling like home. Watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Dorothy was in the garden, directing the placement of rose bushes with the authority of someone who had finally found her kingdom. "Do you ever regret it?" Chloe asked, her head on Ethan's shoulder. "Giving up the world you were born into?" "Never," Ethan said without hesitation. "Do you regret taking the risk?" Chloe thought about the girl who had been cleaning houses 6 months ago, who had never imagined she could love someone like Ethan Wakefield, who had been terrified to want anything beyond survival. "Never," she said, and meant it completely. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Ethan turned to her with an expression she'd learned to treasure, the look that said she was home, she was loved, she was exactly where she belonged. "I have one last confession," he said. "What? That night at the hotel when I kissed you? It wasn't completely random." Chloe raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'd been watching you for 2 weeks. The way you hummed while you worked, the way you left little notes for the other staff members, the way you treated everyone, even the people you thought didn't notice, with kindness." Ethan's smile was soft. "I kissed you because, even then, I knew you were going to change my life. You knew all that from watching me clean your house. I knew you were real in a world full of pretense. I knew you were brave enough to speak your mind to a billionaire CEO. And I knew," he paused, searching for the right words, "I knew that if I could earn the love of someone like you, I might actually become the man I wanted to be." Chloe kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise, while somewhere in the distance her mother's laughter carried on the evening breeze. The girl who had once been afraid to dream had learned something extraordinary. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most impossible circumstances. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to fight for what matters, fairy tales do come true. Your participation on the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. What would you have done in Chloe's place? Would you have taken the risk of exposing everything for love? Share your thoughts below. Your stories and perspectives make this community even more special. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.